Continuing his teaching from the previous chapter on the use of freedom, Paul says, verse 1, "Am I not free?" These are rhetorical questions, by the way, to each of which we would answer, yes. Yes, you're free. Christ has snapped the chains of sin that once bound you. You are free to live for him. Am I not an apostle? Yes, Paul, you're obviously an apostle. Have I not seen Jesus, our Lord? Yes, you saw him on the road to Damascus. We know the story well. Are you not the result of my work in the Lord? Yes. Remember, the church in Corinth was founded by the Apostle Paul, and he preached there for many months to build them up in the faith. Now, having established his credentials, he's now going to go on and make a very interesting argument. He seems to be making this argument in response to what the critics say about him. They say, well, don't you know, Paul is just like a little tent maker. If he was a real apostle, he would put down the tools and take up an offering and be supported in the ministry like all the other apostles. The fact that he is different from them on this point shows that he's not like the others. And so, far from being commended for his selfless generosity, he's being attacked by those who see this as a sign of his inauthenticity. Hence now the argument that he's about to make about the importance of financially supporting those who serve the church. So he says, "This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. Don't we have the right to food and drink?" And later, "Or is it only Barnabas and I who lack the right to not work for a living? Who serves as a soldier at his own expense?" If you were going to war, it would be a very strange thing if the army tried to force you to pay for the tanks you will drive or the aircraft you will fly. No, these things are supplied to you in order to enable you to do the work to which you've been called. Not only are they supplied to you as well as your wages, but you're generally shown a great deal of respect and honour because you're a soldier, putting yourself in harm's way so that others can stay safe. They are blessed by your hard work. Verse 8, he comes to his next argument. "Do I say this on merely human authority? Doesn't the law say the same thing? Do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain." Paul is quoting there from Deuteronomy chapter 25. The idea is that the ox needs food. It needs strength, doesn't it? And you are the one who wants the ox to be strong so that it can tread out the grain which will bless you. And so you should not muzzle that ox. You should not keep it from the sustenance that it needs so that it can devote itself to the task that you want it to do in the first place. Verse 11, "If we have spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? If others have this right of support from you, shouldn't we have it all the more?" He's speaking here with a level of honesty and directness about the issue of money that tends to make the British kind of bristle a little bit. But he is right, isn't he? He's telling the truth here. And here is perhaps one of the reasons why he can be so forthright with all that he's saying here. He's merely establishing that he has the right to be supported materially by them, though he will not make use of that right for reasons that we'll come to. However, whether he makes use of the right or doesn't make use of the right, he wants to establish that that right does exist and the church should expect to give. Do you see how Paul here is applying the idea of biblical wisdom to the issues of his own life? It's the same sort of thing that we saw in the previous chapter. We have this right, he says, to take from you an offering that will support us materially as we sow into your lives spiritually. That is the relationship that we ought to have. That is the right that we could call upon. However, for the sake of wisdom, we are not making use of that right. And so while he has the right to receive from them, he has the wisdom to refrain. That is the idea that ought to govern so much of our lives as well, you know? And his next and final argument is that the Lord has commanded that things ought to be this way. In the same way, verse 14, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. In that way, of course, everyone is able to give to and receive from one another. Paul makes a big point here to say that he has not asked the church in Corinth to provide for his needs, but when he writes to them again, over in the book of 2 Corinthians, he does spell out for them that other churches have been providing for him to enable him to minister to them for free without asking for anything from them. Now, Paul closes this chapter by encouraging the church in Corinth to think with that same mindset and mode. Not what rights do I have so as to secure my own satisfaction, but how might I use godly wisdom to win the lost? This is where that beautiful phrase comes from. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. And as he encourages the church in Corinth, the Lord encourages us today. In what ways might we consider foregoing some of our rights so as to gladly bless others? How might we use the gifts we have been given not simply for our own gratification, but for the ultimate glory of God?